This is a bad movie. Sorry, someone had to say it. Actually, a lot of other people have said that as well. I'm not really breaking new ground here. Alfred Hitchcock, for the most part, is a great director. Questionable person, but we'll get into that later. He pretty much made well-regarded film after well-regarded film for about 51 years, including personal all-time favorites of mine, Rope and Lifeboat. Long live my girl Tallulah. Actually, she died at like 66, so she didn't really live that long. Sorry, not what we're talking about. What were we talking about? Marnie. Marnie is bad. 1964's Marnie is a bad, bad movie starring Birds Lady and Bond Boy, and just... No. 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 I know I'm not articulating this the best right now, but I'm gonna go through the plot and explain how confusing and uneven the experience of watching this is. It begins with a robbery committed by... a woman? See, like I always say, this is what happens when you let them out of the kitchen. But don't worry, she should be caught quite quickly, especially since so many people saw her that the police already have her description.
Black hair, wavy, even features, good teeth.
The way men talk about women in this movie seems so self-aware at first, as if it's trying to portray them as bad people. For instance, this is barely the male lead's second line in the film.
Oh, that one. The brunette with the legs.
I know this is made in the 60s, not exactly the peak of equal opportunities for all, but the amount of overly blatant misogyny is so over the top that it feels like it's trying to make a statement against it. Many people would even argue that it is, but as we'll see, no one is ever punished for this behavior besides Tippi Hedren's character, the literal victim. And when it comes to Tippi especially, it would be rather odd for Hitchcock to make a movie about how awful it is for men to harass her. Anyway, after switching names and hair colors, the titular Marnie goes to visit her mother's house, conveniently located right in front of this shitty-looking backdrop. Obviously, matte painting backgrounds were very common in early to mid-century movies, but apparently this one still looked bad even for the time. After Marnie and her mother reunite, her happy demeanor quickly dissipates when this happens.
Boston, Massachusetts, Elizabeth, New Jersey.
Damn. Kill Bill who? Miss Edgar's relationship with her daughter is strained. She doesn't know about her thievery and mostly believes her story about being a private secretary to some millionaire. Marnie is constantly trying to please her mother by giving her expensive gifts, but she feels very insecure about the way she's seemingly being replaced by this snot-nosed little brat, who Bernice occasionally looks after.
Where's my mother?
She's making a pecan pie.
Marnie goes to Philadelphia and interviews for a job at Rutland & Co. She lacks substantial references, likely due to the fact that almost every other place she's worked at has been mysteriously robbed under her watch. But Mark Rutland himself comes in and insists they hire her, even though he is aware of her history of larceny, as he was a client of her previous employer and saw her at the office. And, I don't know, thought she was hot, so gives her the job. She, however, does not realize this and begins working as normal, already formulating a plan to get into the money safe. That is until disaster strikes.
Mrs. Taylor, are you hurt?
Well, I'm not. All that happened was I spilled a little ink on my blouse.
Okay. Rutland asks her to work overtime on Saturday, and she agrees. He has her type up a paper on zoology, which has absolutely nothing to do with the company, just because I guess he's interested in it. Not sure you should be using company funds and property to do that, but I guess in a quite literal sense, he is the boss. A thunderstorm starts to give her a panic attack, and in an attempt to calm her down, he kisses her, his employee, without permission. But the movie doesn't think it's a big deal, so neither should you. Yay, 60s. Mark Rutland is an interesting character, to say the least. By that I mean he's one of the most insufferably despicable people to not really be acknowledged as the fuckwad that he is. Mostly owing to the fact that he's played by Sean Connery, so he's not a creepy asshole for constantly disrespecting her boundaries and being a manipulative dick. He's just sexy, sexy broody boy who can't take no for an answer. He takes her out to the racetrack after she tells him about her love for horses, where she's recognized by a former acquaintance of one of her alternate identities.
Aren't you Peggy Nicholson?
No, I'm not.
Oh, come on now, honey. You're trying to pull my leg, aren't you?
When visiting one of her favorite horses, Telepathy, Marnie once again does this and tells Mark to back out of her bet on him. Now, as you've probably noticed, because it's been brought up at least once every 10 minutes in the film, Marnie has a fear of the color red, which is a real thing called erythrophobia, or more broadly chromophobia, and this movie's even mentioned on its Wikipedia page. But here it's very poorly done, and so unnecessarily over the top and inconsistent as hell. It's also not brought up again until the last 15 minutes of the movie. So really set it up in the beginning and we're just like, yeah, that's good, they'll remember. Does the so-called master of suspense really trust his audience so little that he needs to put a red filter over the screen after every time she sees something red, just in case they're too dumb to pick up on the very subtle way she said, and I quote, "The colors, stop the colors." But I digress. Once again, without asking her, Rutland takes her to meet his family, consisting of his father and former sister-in-law Lil, who is by far the most entertaining character in the movie.
Well, I have absolutely no scruples. I'd lie to the police or anything.
She was the sister-in-law of Mark's deceased wife, who still lives with them for some reason, and is just shamelessly attracted to him the whole time, which is really awkward the first time I watched this because I thought she was his sister, but that wasn't the film's fault. They made that pretty clear. I'm just stupid. The next Friday at work, Marnie puts her plan into action in what I have to say is a pretty incredibly executed sequence. There is a reason Hitchcock had such a prolific career. He was very talented. Although it is a bit contrived that she puts her shoes in her pockets instead of just carrying them, but besides that, this is very well filmed. Oh look, the only person of color in the movie. He doesn't even get a name, and he never comes back. Mark tracks her down to where she keeps her horse Forio in Virginia, appearing like something out of a goddamn horror movie. And commandeers Forio. Back in the hotel room, he says this to her.
I'm fighting a powerful impulse to beat the hell out of you.
And they say chivalry's dead. Props to her, though. She keeps spinning lies despite the threat of physical violence. But he does confront her with his knowledge of her past. Eventually, he tells her that she has a choice. Either she marries him, or he will have her arrested for her crimes. Wow, what a proposal. This is also after she implies that she is both asexual and aromantic. She says she liked him, but even he acknowledges that it was nothing more than that. So just extra creepy to know that she was never actually interested in him, and he's forcing her into this completely, and she responds accordingly.
You're crazy. You're out of your mind.
But is forced to go along with it, even after resorting to begging him not to. He says he's in love with her, which, like, dude, come on, you're not even fooling her.
I've tracked you and caught you, and by God, I'm gonna keep you.
This scene is fucking unhinged. Obviously, I can't show the whole thing, but really gross. He says he wants to take possession of her.
It's disgusting.
Marnie, though, being the strong-willed character that she is, calls him out on every count. And this actually feels like it's on her side with how messed up this arrangement is. At the beginning of the film, Marnie's legitimately a cool character. Yeah, she's a criminal, but she's smart, self-reliant, and almost completely aware of herself. She even talks to her mother about how they didn't need men in their lives to be successful, which feels like where she should be at the end of the movie, so the only way she can move in terms of growth is backwards, apparently. She's torn down time and time again until she's nothing but a shuddering shell of her former self. But I'm getting ahead of myself. They get married, Marnie looking appropriately unenthused at the situation. And a nice detail is that Lil pointedly wears red to the wedding, a faux pas even when the bride isn't deathly afraid of the color. And Lil's suspicion is also piqued when she figures out Mark spent over $70,000 on the wedding, which nowadays would be worth over $680,000. Then the honeymoon begins, and as does the worst part of the film, which is saying a lot. They're staying on a cruise ship, and on the wedding night, Marnie stays in the bathroom for almost an hour. She makes it very clear she does not like to be touched in any sexual manner. Then, of course, he's all like, "What, I'm not hot enough for you, babe?" Alfred Hitchcock does have a history of queer representation in his films. He went out of his way on multiple occasions to work with LGBTQ+ actors. Despite the Hays era, he made the bulk of his work in explicitly banning such depictions. Marnie, at first, seems like it could be one of those films. But instead of Marnie's asexuality being used to develop her character, it is used to humiliate and almost fetishize her to a degree. And then this motherfucker tells Marnie how lucky she is to be caught by him and not
Some other sexual blackmailer.
another. So he basically just admitted that he is in fact sexually blackmailing her. At least he's honest. She also very obviously has some trauma related to sex that he fully realizes but continues to push anyway.
Oh, men. You say no thanks to one of them, and bingo, you're a candidate for the funny farm.
Does have a point. He then promises not to try anything with her, which she appreciates. Almost immediately succeeding that, he does, in a very uncomfortable scene. Yeah, what you think just happened did just happen. I'll admit, I never read the book this is based on, so I don't know if this scene is from the novel, but you didn't have to make this character we're supposedly meant to root for commit one of the most deplorable acts imaginable. And I know that because the original screenwriter didn't want to. He even wrote another version of it where he left the scene out entirely just to show that it would work, to which the director promptly fired him. Personally, I typically don't have an issue with depictions of SA in media. It's a horrific but realistic part of life that people should be able to explore artistically. But it needs to be handled tactfully. For instance, in one of Hitchcock's other films, Frenzy, it tackles the subject as well, but also does a pretty bad job in a very different way. In Marnie, everything is implied. You don't actually see the act itself, but Frenzy shows the entire thing, making sure to get close-ups of Brenda's breasts, legs, and thighs as if it's supposed to be hot instead of monstrous. Yet, at the very least, that movie was condemning the perpetrator's actions, and gives the scene the gravity it deserves. Whereas this is never verbally brought up again by any of the characters after they leave the boat. The next morning, Mark wakes up to find that Marnie is gone. She apparently tried to commit suicide by drowning in the pool, but he pulls her out. He wonders why she tried it in the pool and not in the ocean, to which she clarifies.
The idea was to kill myself, not feed the damn fish.
Ha! 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 Well, it's over. They go back home. And Mark seems all confused as to why she's acting strangely.
So, naturally, as you want to be with me as...
A lot of the rest of the movie just kinda meanders. There's not much suspense in the mystery because the audience already knows most of the answers. Rutland brings Forio back to the house, but Lil is caught onto their ruse and tells Mark about Marnie's mother. He then begins to investigate. Earlier on, Mark suggested that Marnie see a therapist. He now attempts to act as one to her, and this is a pretty good time to mention that Tippi Hedren is an incredible actress. This movie's kinda shit, okay, more than kinda, in terms of plot, but she's far and away the best part, making it all the more unfortunate that due to her, for legal reasons, allegedly, rejecting a certain large British man's advances, her career didn't take off as much as it could have. This scene also has a really weird slant to it. Pretty much everything Marnie says is a really good point, and she rightfully calls out Rutland for all of his hypocrisies.
You've got a pathological fix on a woman who's not only an admitted criminal, but who screams if you come near her.
Yet, once again, it's Mark who seemingly walks away the winner by psyching her out just by talking about the color red.
I won't let anything bad happen to you. You're all right.
Jesus, it's like if a streetcar named Desire decided that subtlety is overrated and Stanley wasn't actually such a bad guy after all. Actually, Streetcar's a pretty good comparison. Lots of color symbolism, having a mystery around the main character without just giving the audience the information, and a brutal scene done with the respect and subtlety owed to such a topic. Hell, Blanche and Marnie are basically mirror images of each other, with Blanche's innocent persona obfuscating her inner socially unacceptable extramarital promiscuity, and Marnie's marital chastity being seen as unnatural by her husband. Sorry, tangent over. Back to the plot. Lil invites Strut, the man robbed in the opening, to a house party, and Marnie panics. But Mark promises to bribe him into submission. How sweet. What a true gentleman.
Marnie, tonight the door stays open.
The next day, Marnie joins the hunt, but is freaked out by this man in a red jacket. And I personally don't blame her. I mean, the dress code was one word. Black. And you fucked it up, Albert. She rides back to the house with Lil close behind, but doesn't quite make it over that wall, leading her to make the very rational decision of immediately blasting its brains out.
Tell this fool to give me a gun. Forio's hurt.
Chill, girl, you don't know that. It might just be bruised or something.
There now.
Okay. Anyway, see ya, Lil. We never see her again after this scene. Marnie decides to go full rogue after that and sneaks back to Rutland & Co. to rob them for a second time. I mean, let's be honest, Mark was kind of asking for it, just leaving these keys lying around. Although he does figure it out pretty quickly and gets there in time to confront her.
You're just exhausted. Now don't panic. I've spoken to Strut.
Okay, no, that doesn't happen. But how great would that be, right? In fact, I think that's how the movie should end. In that one moment when you think she might actually do it, you could even see how good the entire thing could be if it just acknowledged how terrible this man is. She is not perfect by any means, but Marnie is at least owed freedom from his abuse. But instead we just get more of him talking to her like a temperamental child. Mark takes her to Baltimore to see her mother, and confronts Bernice on the way she mistreated Marnie in the past. Oh really? Yeah. Kettle there's the real monster, ain't she, Pot? And even that's not a good allegory, because what he accuses her mom of doing isn't even that bad. I thought he was gonna say she was like pimping Marnie out or something as a child, but no, that would make too much sense. What he does reveal makes me like her mother even more, actually. According to Mark's mid-20th century equivalent of a Google search, back when Marnie was little, her mother was working as a prostitute. She'd make Marnie sleep out on a chair outside of the bedroom when she had a client over. And one night, hey, is that Bruce Dern? Sorry, not important. One night, after Miss Edgar finished with her famous-faced gentleman caller, Marnie began to have terrors due to the thunderstorm, and the sailor went out to comfort her. Mistaking this for him, let's call it pulling a Rutland, Bernice, rightfully so, freaks out and tries to drag him away. When he falls on her mother and injures her leg, Marnie grabs the fire poker Bernice had been using and just kills the guy. Miss Edgar then takes the blame for her daughter and goes to prison for a few years, and succeeds at getting Marnie to suppress the memories afterwards. No idea why she didn't just tell the truth to the police. I know 1964 Maryland wasn't exactly the friendliest place in terms of the legal system, but I don't think they'd send a 5-year-old to the state penitentiary. Look, maybe her mom shouldn't have been encouraging her to forget about that traumatic event, but at least she was making an attempt to help her, even if it was a bit misguided. And I don't think information dealing with how to help children getting through a crisis was exactly commonplace back then. And that's it. That's the big, terrible secret hidden within that unravels everything. The reason she's scared of thunderstorms, intimacy, and the color red. The third one because of the sailor's blood scaring her. But none of that matters now because the movie's over. Mark and Marnie, my new favorite sitcom airing at 3 p.m. Wednesdays on ABC Family, ride off into the acrylic sunrise together as thunderstorm clears up. And Marnie promises to confess to her crimes and take the punishment she deserves. Yes, because she is definitely the one I want to see pay for her crimes of stealing money from rich perverts. While the literal abuser, he's free to go live happily ever after. Can't say it's not accurate. Okay, so you know at the end of The Birds where Melanie is basically a shadow of her former self? Just a trembling little deer in the headlights needing her big strong man to support her? Well, that's pretty much exactly what happens in this one, with her even going back into a childlike state as the big reveal is taking place.
You hear? Let my mama go.
Both times, Hedren's characters basically go through a regression, starting out witty and self-assured and are continually broken down until they're basically helpless. Don't get me wrong, The Birds is still a masterpiece in terms of storytelling and effects for the time, but Marnie is just so egregious in its disdain for the main character, and obvious in the satisfaction it gets from making her look weak and pathetic. I have seen people defending this film by saying Mark is supposed to be the villain and intentionally cruel and manipulative, but unfortunately I think somebody forgot to tell the movie itself, because this ending doesn't read as a tragedy with the sweeping, uplifting music that plays as a new day dawns on the horizon. It reads more as, wow, true love really does heal all, doesn't it? Going back to my earlier comparison to A Streetcar Named Desire, both works actually end off in a pretty similar way, with the heroine having to pay the price for their past while the male lead gets everything they wanted and likely going on to continue mistreating their wives for all eternity. Although I think Streetcar is far closer to being considered a quote-unquote suspenseful sex mystery than Marnie could ever wish to be. However, there is a big difference between the two endings. The framing. Stanley is a very hateable character, and the text is more than aware of that. He's intelligent, so now and again he can make a good point, but at no time is the average viewer going to be actively rooting for him to get a happy ending. And when, spoiler alert, he does, it's not triumphant and full of whimsy, it's dour and highlights how scarred all the other characters were by the events of the plot. The movie adaptation does leave off on a bit of a higher note as opposed to the play, but let's be honest, Stella probably ended up going back to him eventually, as we saw her do before. Now, I don't think Marnie should have ended in the same way as A Streetcar Named Desire. The dynamic is very different between both sets of leads, as Blanche is trying to get her sister to leave an abusive relationship, and Marnie wants to get herself out of one that she didn't even want to be in the first place. From my perspective at least, the best way to fix the entire thing would be to just cut all of the mother's stuff, it's convoluted and unnecessary, and only really has any bearing on the plot at the very beginning and end of the film. Then have it end with Marnie overcoming her demons on her own and killing Mark. Even if she ends up having to go to jail for her crimes so the movie isn't seen as morally corrupting the youth, I think it would be so much more impactful. It would still be well over an hour and a half without the moral of the story being, the rapist is right, how dare you try to protect your daughter. To finish off where I started, Alfred Hitchcock has made some incredible films. This is not one of them. I mentioned earlier that he did fire the original screenwriter, which is true, but what I didn't mention is that the person he was replaced with was J. Preston Allen, meaning this was adapted by the same person who wrote the screenplay for Cabaret. Sorry, the same woman who wrote the screenplay for Cabaret. I have so many questions.
Although even she admitted Marnie wasn't her best work.
No shit. I would not recommend this one. Maybe give it a pass. If I had to give it a number out of 10, I think I'd give it a...
Red.